and Damage Fund, L&D. With me. How the L&D started. It originated some time back, and then जो पूरी उसने रोशनी पिछले साल में पकड़ी है, especially on the COP and Pakistan's role on that. So please enlighten us a little bit on how it started and where is it today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for organizing such an important session. The history of Loss and Damage Fund, I think the word fund actually got added somewhere along the way, but loss and damage was very much part of the 1992 Convention on Climate Change, and it was back then actually recognized that the countries are going to be increasingly facing the damages and the losses out of the climate change impacts, adverse impacts of the climate change. And it was also recognized in the convention as well that some kind of a compensatory mechanism or some kind of a funding mechanism should be instituted which basically compensate these countries, especially the developing countries and least developed countries and small island developing state SIDDs, and to basically provide the funding and to compensate the losses out of the climate change, because the 1992 Convention is built on the principle that the climate change is not due to the result of the contributions of the developing countries. They are on the receiving end, and so the developed or the rich nations have to take the burden. And based on a very similar principle, it was stipulated in the convention that a compensatory mechanism for the losses and the damages should be instituted. Over the period of the international negotiations, it actually have been kind of gaining currency and the popularity along the way. And sometime it became very, very popular, but then over the time, other agenda items, other issues actually took the precedent and took the space of it. What we have seen, I think, in Warsaw Mechanism, Warsaw International Mechanism, it again was very well recognized, and it came as a separate agenda item in the international negotiations. And since then, it has been very prominently discussed, negotiated, and the culmination we saw actually in Sharm el-Sheikh in COP27, when due to the efforts by Pakistan, this fund was formally established. So this is a brief history of the fund, or the Loss and Damage Fund. And since then, actually, we've seen the Transitional Committee actually taking some decisions, making the recommendations, which has not gone really in a very big favor of developing countries, but I stop here.
Thank you so much for that. I'd like to come back to you, but I'll move to Mr. Abid Suleri for that. What role do you see Pakistan played during COP27, and what pushed Pakistan actually to be in a role and to be that channel where it all transformed into an L&D fund, while we just heard that the discussions had been ongoing for years now. So if you could shed some light that what pushed Pakistan and its stance at the COP27, and how are we taking that agenda forward while we move into COP28 in about 2 weeks' time? Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Fawad. What happened in Pakistan would not stay in Pakistan was the punchline after super floods 2022 that affected almost 1/3 of the people of Pakistan, causing around $30 billion of losses, according to multilateral institutions. Now, incidentally, Pakistan last year had the presidency of a very major negotiating group in COP, G77 plus China. And it was the presidency of Pakistan, and it was this insurmountable losses due to floods that actually supported the whole cause of establishing Loss and Damage Fund. And it was, of course, Pakistan's leadership, and we must also thank this international civil society and the academicians like Jeffrey Sachs, who wrote very powerful editorial pieces on Pakistan's losses and how rich countries they are shying away from their responsibility. Now, of course, the battle has just started. The announcement for establishing this fund was there in COP27, but as Bilal rightly mentioned, that now in the run-up to COP28, one can see that the momentum is sort of diluting, and it would be due to the granular details of loss and damage fund. What would be the definition of loss? What would be the definition of vulnerable countries if temperature rises to 40 degrees Celsius in London, or if there are these heat waves or summer fires in the Mediterranean countries of Europe. So will it be considered as climate vulnerable countries or not? And whether China and India and other economies, new economies, will they be contributing towards the funds? And most importantly, if this fund gets established, what would be the mechanism of disbursement of finances from it, whether it would be again linked through IMF and World Bank, which we know that have lots of strings that a climate vulnerable country cannot fulfill. And then if you remember Antonio Guterres' statement where he says that international financial institutes, they are rotting and they are failing developing nations, climate vulnerable developing nations. And he has more than once given emphasis on formulating new sort of Bretton Woods consensus for climate financing. So all of these things, perhaps looking back at COP's history, they would easily take another 5 to 7 years before one can see something tangible coming out from loss and damage fund. But for us, the mere fact that L&D is placed on agenda of COPs, I think that in itself is a big victory.
Thank you so much for that. Quite enlightening. I'd like to pick up your brains, Mr. Bilal, on that. A couple of things. The agenda itself is diluting, as mentioned. Comments of the SG that institutions are being run. You mentioned Transitional Committee. This was the 4th meeting. Pakistan got included in the 4th one, wasn't there in the first 3. So that's one aspect of that. And when we say that it's going to take another 5-7 years, how do you consider it being placed with the World Bank now, where it's right there under the discussions, for almost the same number of years? So what are the merits or demerits of placing it with an institution like World Bank? And then while we apprehend the fact that it's going to take about 5-7 years just to mature, and then we come to who are actually vulnerable countries and what will be the definition of loss. But before that, please.
Yeah, so Larissa rightly mentioned that the loss and damage fund actually has lost its kind of a strength along the way. And we know the reasons for that. Even in Sharm el-Sheikh, it was a result of a political deal. And when those deals happen in the late morning hours in the COPs, we often actually see a watered down version of those decisions, and that is the result of loss and damage fund decision as well. But on the other hand, it is claimed to be a victory, and I think there is a very good justification for that as well. Now, placing it, the Transitional Committee actually made a recommendation to the COP that to place it in the World Bank for the first 4 years of its operations. It has its merits and demerits, as you mentioned, Fawad. I think the one big merit, of course, is that World Bank, if everyone else in the room doesn't mind me saying, that it's a functional institution, so it has this kind of institutional functionality, and they have the placement in the presence in the number of almost all the countries. So in that sense, I think the 5 to 7 years kind of operational time which we are talking about, that might be shortened. But on the other hand, actually, it can be lost into the bureaucracy of the World Bank as well. So one has to be extremely careful. One has to be extremely kind of judicious in terms of its operationalization as well. And it does actually enjoy the independence status of it as well. I think one of the biggest concerns with the developing countries are facing right now is loss and damage fund is not meant to be have any kind of a connotation of a bank. And the biggest discomfort was that it might actually function, it might actually evolve as a bank, and we all know that. What does it mean? So I think that's a kind of there are merits and there are demerits, and the biggest disadvantage which the countries actually are fearing is it is going to be kind of a function like a World Bank as well, and they are going to have a number of challenges in terms of kind of setting up and having the access to the financing as well. But there is another point actually, which is related to the capitalization of it, where the funding is going to come from, and that still remains an open-ended question. And within the bank, actually, again, a kind of a fear is that it's not going to meet the principle or the conditionality of new and additional funding. So it can very easily actually be the funding which is provided to the bank or other institution can be relabeled and can be diverted as a climate finance or a funding related to the losses and damages. So I think it is a complex question. The developing countries are not extremely happy about it, and they have very expressively poured out their discomfort. And as Larissa mentioned, there is going to be quite an open battle in Dubai in COP28, because we are hearing that the developing countries are saying they are not going to accept that recommendation. It's going to open up the negotiations once again. So let's see. It's going to be interesting nights in COP28.
Thank you so much. So Larissa, building on Bilal's point of view and the fact that since he's worked more than a decade in the Secretariat, so he knows how negotiations are done and how they manipulate the developing countries and stance, and the way it was approved last year. So it was a political deal, and now it's going to be a bigger Pandora box with the World Bank hosting it for a while we see that even if it does host with World Bank or if it doesn't, it still is going to take 5-7 years. What if the developing countries do not let it be placed with World Bank, and the issue itself gets diluted and vanishes in 5 years? Where do we stand then?
You see, the multilateral environmental negotiations, COP negotiation, is all about give and take. You ask for moon and you settle for not stars, just one star. So obviously, now there would be a lot of pressure in Dubai on the presidency because of fossil fuel. So Dubai, UAE government would try to get something out of this declaration from this UAE declaration. There would be pressure on fossil fuel, phasing out, pressure on fossil fuel, phase down. And that's where perhaps oil exporting countries, they would try to somehow, at least in this COP28, give some sort of comfort to G77 members, and especially the African members of G77 who are quite vocal. The next COP is going to face another geopolitics, COP29. It is going to take place in Eastern Europe, and Russia has already now threatened to boycott it if it happens in Eastern Europe. So I think these factors, we need to keep these factors in mind. Any country that hosts COP becomes responsible to get something out of it, so that there must be some sort of legacy of the declaration that takes place there. Now, on one side, yes, we know that the agenda, may get diluted, but then and on another side, 2024 is important because next year there would be a very important summit on reformation of global financial institutes. So there would be international governments, there would be meeting and try to think of how to reform the whole IFIs, World Bank, IMF. And I think with these geopolitical and geoeconomic developments, the developing countries, they need to keep their momentum. One of the reasons that after last COP, we couldn't retain the momentum, that soon after floods, unfortunately, there was this earthquake in Turkey, and then the war in Ukraine. It got further extended. And then there is this unfortunate situation developing in the Middle East. So the world is coming from one tragedy to another. So really now it's the battle between urgent and important, where urgent is taking precedence and important things, they are going on back burner. And that's where the developing countries, they need to keep their pressure, they need to keep their momentum, and if they can, there can be certainly something good coming out of it, whether reformation of these IFIs or something about this transitory arrangement of financing and funding if loss and damage fund it gets delayed, or some sort of watering down of use of fossil fuel. And if any of these three things happens, it's a win-win situation for us. But at domestic side, I think we need to strengthen the funds that we have, and I'm referring to NDRMF. So whatever we are advocating for at a global level, internationally, I think the same rule applies domestically. So we need to, and Bilal is sitting here, so I will suggest him that he needs to think of some sort of mechanism where NDRMF can be sort of loss and damage fund for Pakistan, so that federating units and federation, they can contribute to it. We know that it would be difficult to amend the formula of NFC and adding climate vulnerability in the formula, just like we had poverty and we have war on terror and backwardness. But if we can strengthen NDRMFP in the lines of loss and damage funds principle, perhaps it would be something good coming out of what we are advocating internationally and globally.
Thank you so much for that. Before I move to Bilal, I have a follow-up question before I ask him what NDRMF might just be doing on the last lines you mentioned. Now, given the optics that the COP28 is in Dubai, and from the nature of the region, every region has a certain nature. Some COPs are supposed to be like, okay, but there are places where the hosts want to really come out with something. They want to prove something that this was a successful COP. And moving on to the next one, which will be in Eastern Europe, so that has its own dynamics. And that's a war-ridden region for that matter, so it does not really qualify into the loss and damage sort of stuff, where Pakistan is. So how do you see that we moving from presidency, and now we are SBI chair for that matter, and we moving into a COP where the host would want to come out with something? What do you see or suggest would be our stance that we achieve something for ourselves? I mean, there's a common agenda where developing countries are part of the G77 in China, and then there's a bigger agenda with LDCs and SIDS included in it. But just talking about Pakistan, how do you see we can gain something out of these 2 weeks of negotiations and see what can we bring back to the country as part of a success? What would you qualify as a success for us in this matter?
Well, I'll bet on just energy transition. So while loss and damage and all other things, we should keep our momentum there. As I said, that politics of geopolitical situation of the region, the COP is being held in oil exporting countries. And that's where countries like Pakistan, because if there is pressure on fossil fuel phase out, we should put the demand for just energy transition. We are willing to phase out our coal-based power plants, for example. But then in order to do it, if we have to wrap up those 4 coal-based power plants, we would be requiring X amount of money for facing the legal battle and all sort of arbitration that we will have to go through to wrap up those coal-based power plants. So that is my moon that I'm asking for. And then I'm happy to settle for a deal like in COP26, there was a deal with South Africa. South Africa was supported by a few European countries plus Scotland to phase out its coal-based power plants. In COP27, the similar deal was done with Indonesia. So I think Pakistan, given our historical energy mix where coal had no place, we should be now talking about just energy transition, and for the transitory period, we need to negotiate some sort of technology transfer, some sort of compensation mechanism. And if that happens, that would be a win for Pakistan, and that would be a win for host country, which of course will not be willing to phase out fossil fuel completely, but perhaps they can think of some sort of transition.
Thank you so much. A great tangible output, very direction oriented at what you're supposed to do. How do you react to the suggestion that NDRMF should be the L&D fund for Pakistan? And is there something NDRMF is doing, or what should be done by NDRMF in order to achieve this particular perspective?
Yeah, well, just to spice it up a little bit, I would say that NDRMF might not be actually at this stage right now where we can actually demonstrate that we are actually a loss and damage fund, but we are definitely getting there. You know, we are working towards that. So I think a lot of homework yet to be done here. I mean, this is of course fully recognized, and I think the government of Pakistan or state basically have to allocate and ring fence some financing for an institution like NDRMF, which we can actually allocate for disaster restriction, climate adaptation, even energy transition, and a number of other areas as well. So with the kind of a work which we have done and the work which we are aspiring to do, I think in a matter of a year or two, we should be able to demonstrate to the world that okay, this is a functional institution, and that institution can be replicated in Indonesia and Mexico, in other parts of the world as well. So that role, I mean, I'm actually kind of have that kind of a vision, and I'm working towards that direction. But I think it doesn't really kind of undermine the importance of the international kind of a financing. I think that still is there, and then the developed countries have to kind of, you know, feel their responsibility, and they have to come up with the additional financing which should be provided to the developing countries. I mean, what we are seeing is kind of a totally kind of an opposite direction going on. Development assistance is going down. We have the credible data from OECD right now. You know, one observation or one finding is that a lot of development assistance, I mean, they never reach to that level of development assistance, which is somewhere there in the Paris Club. I think it's about 2 or 3% of their GDP. We never reached to that threshold, but it started going down. And one observation or finding is that a lot of development assistance is being relabeled and classified as climate finance. I think that need to be stopped as well. And one thing about the loss and damage fund, it has to be built and operationalized on additional financing, which I think is going to be one of the stumbling blocks for the negotiations moving ahead.
You've touched a very important point while we move to the end of our conversation, but I'd like to have your comments from the both of you on additional financing. There's no financing coming in, and especially comparing that to our absorptive capacity in the country as well. Looking at country's perspective, how much absorptive capacity do we have so that we only wish for that particular funding? And are we really looking at additional financing coming in, or it's just jungling of numbers?
No, I think it's a matter of principle, and I think we shouldn't really kind of mix it up, or we try to kind of water it down with our absorptive capacity. I'm not ruling it out. That is a genuine and very authentic problem, of course, here in Pakistan. But when we're talking about loss and damage fund, international fund, we're talking about not only about Pakistan, we're talking about a number of kind of countries, you know, coming together, clubbing together, and joining their hands and joining their voice to come for this fund to be fully financed. So I think additionality principle remains very valid, and whether some countries are able to absorb it at this point or not. And secondly, the other kind of affiliated rule of the principle is that the countries need to build their capacity, and international financial institutions have to come up with the mechanisms and the programs to build their capacity. We have seen this kind of a realization coming at a very late stage in the GCF, and for adaptation fund, actually that has not really fully utilized. And I think for loss and damage fund, it becomes even more critical, because this whole animal is very complex, and you know, to quantifying the losses and the damages, to create the differentiation between what is the loss and what is the damage, what is associated with the climate change, and what is associated with other kind of issues which might be prevailing in the country. So this is complex, but nevertheless, I think as a matter of principle, the funding has to be additional.
Perfect. Abid sir, last points from your side, last comments on the fact it seems like a very uphill task, to be honest. It's going to take anywhere between 5 to 10 years just to make it operational, then to put funding into it, and especially additional funding perspective. So that funding into it, and then Pakistan taking its own time just to grab some money out of that fund. So practically it seems like somewhere like 5 to 10 years. That's a long way. We cannot really wait with the bleeding economy and vulnerabilities increasing day by day, and the gap increasing between what we can ring fence for a resilient Pakistan financing and what we can take out from the GDP. So what do you suggest we do in between with a small fiscal gap just to spend on this once? So what do you suggest we do for the next 2 to 5 years while we await the L&D to be in some shape of financing to be available?
Well, on finances, I think this carbon market mechanism, perhaps it would be more speedier and more quicker than loss and damage. And I think we need to build our capacity both as a major seller of carbon credits, but also to be able to negotiate better price for carbon credits and ensuring that some of those carbon sequestration or carbon reduction get used to complete our NDCs. So I'm more optimistic about carbon markets, because this greenwashing, quote unquote, that also suits the emitters and polluters. And of course, they'll be looking at the potential in developing countries like Pakistan, where they can actually buy carbon credit and they can justify their unabated emission. But simultaneously, of course, we need to remain ready for absorbing some sort of additional funding. On additional funding, my comment is that we need to build our capacity to write good PC1s. Now I'm coming to nitty-gritty. So if in the ministries, if there is a lack of capacity to write good proposal, and if the proposals are to be written by World Bank and IMF consultants and ADB consultants, then of course Pakistan's hope for making most of its available finances through L&D, through carbon credits, through any other additional climate financing mechanisms, they would get watered down. So it is about building our capacity in the ministries and in the line departments. It's about building a cadre of climate finance within our government. Now, if there was this ping-pong match between Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Climate Change and this Economic Affairs Division, who will be housing this climate finance, with that sort of tug of war, I think it would be extremely difficult for us to be a beneficiary of these emerging opportunities. Once for all, we need to sort it out, who would be housing the emerging climate finances mechanism, and then we need to have a team in place that should be there, a tenure protected team for at least 5 years, so that they can build their capacity both in negotiation, in making proposals, in getting them implemented. And if we can do this course correction within our own procedures and policies and practices, then there are ample opportunities. If that cannot be done, then any amount of funding would have the same fate as we had with the clean development mechanism, where Pakistan couldn't either float successful proposals or was not able to bring that significant share of money that it should have brought otherwise to Pakistan.
Thank you so much. You've touched on a very excellent opportunity when it comes to financing. And while the ministries can settle down, I'd just like Mr. Bilal to shed some light on what NDRMF is doing, and then we close it for tonight. That what is NDRMF doing, playing as a platform role for carbon markets and taking the agenda forward? Over to you, sir.
Yeah, well, we're doing a lot. And carbon markets is one small kind of a piece and a component of it, and we do realize that they are going to be increasingly playing a very important role in the carbon financing or the overall kind of a climate finance, carbon finance landscape in the country. And exactly for the same set of reasons, what Larry Saab mentioned, that given the private sector engagement and the dynamism and the excitement, that might be kind of an easy nut to crack. And this is what NDRMF actually have just came forward, and we are engaged and working with the private sector on that. But nevertheless, at the same time, we are working on the other pieces as well, which is the classical or the traditional climate finance components as well. So we are building, especially in the flood and the classical DRR components. We are engaged with a number of donors and trying to build up our financial muscles for that, because the country does need that. And the DRF is another very important piece, and where we think that we can make an impact by, again, in a collaboration and partnership with the private sector, especially the banking, finance, capital markets, and insurance industry into it. At the same time, we are actually we have just started an exercise of undertaking this policy diagnostic exercise, which should allow us or provide some good insights in terms of what policy gaps and deficiencies actually exist in different policies within the country, and then come up with a mechanism for plugging those deficiencies. And just this is all is kind of paving way and streamlining the process for flow or unlocking of climate finance. So I think this thing to absorptive capacity, I think it actually entails a number of things, and starting from structural to institutional to down to the level of coming up with good proposals as well as PC1s, and then moving towards the implementation of it as well. So we are somehow engaged across the spectrum, and from institutional all the way down to the implementation, where we are very much strengthening our fund implementing partners, and so they can actually, once we have everything and we got the funding, and they can implement the project in timely fashion. So yes, right now there is quite a plate full for NDRMF.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us here. Thank you for all the audience and listeners who joined us online. Must have been very enlightening. Please keep following NDRMF and SDPI for the agenda they're taking forward on a daily basis. Let's not wait for things to happen. Let's do our part. Let's play our part on a daily basis. Let's improve our capacities. Let's improve our project development process. Let's improve our role in the L&D, in the IFIs, in the access to them, and then justifiably implementing those projects in an efficient and effective, transparent manner. I thank you all. I thank you too for joining us, and a very good night to everybody. Thank you, and Allah Hafiz.
Sir, thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah.